So what can we fit in tonight?
Well, tonight, as you said, we're talking about key relationships, which is one of the 4 roots of the tree in our book, which we talk about being the 4 things you really need to think about in this stage of our lives. In fact, they're pretty important any stage in your life, but as things, as we get older, it gets a bit more pressing, as we all know. And we've got 2 lovely guests, Malcolm Doney and Liz Curran, who are going to join us shortly to talk about their experience with key relationships. We just wanted to drop in before we go on that we hope we haven't driven you mad with emails about subscribing to our mailing list, but we're trying to clean up our mailing list so that we don't email you multiple times. So thank you for signing up if you have. I know a whole bunch of you have, so that's great. And we'll remind you how to do that at the end.
It's a GDPR, all that kind of thing.
Yeah,
so
yeah,
we're trying to get a bit more grown up about it.
Yeah. So Tilly, just tell us what we need to know about the housekeeping, how it'll work.
Hello everyone, welcome back. So yeah, as usual, everyone's muted, so that means mum and dad can just waffle on as long as they like, but there will be a Q&A towards the end. So if you want to join in the Q&A, then I invite you to join in with the chat, which I'm just sending you a message on now. And do feel free to write comments, thoughts, questions, jokes in the chat as we go through. If you're happy to be come to at the end of the presentation and more in the Q&A part, then if you just put question or Q at the beginning of your comment, then I will take that as a signal that I can come to you live to contribute with your voice and video. And this is being recorded as usual. That's it. And
talking about key relationships, you're going to light a candle, aren't you?
Yeah. We always do this. So this is a little thing to be mindful of the painful things that are going on out there, the people who are ill and dying and really struggling.
The people we can't be with. So we're thinking particularly of our friend Kate and Rob and family, who she sent an email only a few minutes ago saying her mum is in an old people's home where the virus has now entered the home. So they can't be with us on this call. So we're thinking of them. And this is for all the other people that are in that kind of predicament. And that is a useful cue to talk about. You give a preface to this chat about key relationships. It is very difficult to know exactly how to tackle this thing because it's so personal, so emotive. And so just bear with us as we do our best to just touch on what's really, really important with key relationships. If it raises big feelings for you, I'm not surprised. And frankly, we would encourage you just to pause and take those things seriously. And if you want to contact us privately afterwards to talk about stuff, then of course you'd be most welcome to do that. If you have our email, it's Judy@act3life.com, Adrian@act3life.com, and we can suggest further support. You don't have to talk to us about anything, but we can perhaps connect you to someone who might be able to help.
Yeah, it's very important, especially this week. So there's a guy who sadly has died a long time ago called John O'Donoghue. Many of you will know his work and his reflections and his poetry, and we've got a little one for you now. And it's about taking stock, which we need to do in our relationships. And this is called, "This is the time to be slow." This is the time to be slow. Lie low to the wall until the bitter weather passes. Try, as best you can, not to let the wire brush of doubt scrape from your heart all sense of yourself and your hesitant light. If you remain generous, time will come good, and you will find your feet again on fresh pastures of promise, where the air will be kind and blushed with beginning.
Great. He's always a big hit, that guy.
Well, I think with him...
How does that relate to key relationships?
Well, I think it is sometimes, especially if they're relationships that are going to go on a long time, and maybe by Act 3, a lot of them have gone on a long time, it is time to be slow and take the longer view again and not be destroyed by the fight of the day or the difficult moment or feeling uncertain and unsure. And there's a lot of uncertainty still inhabiting all of our lives with the coronavirus, and we're all waiting for the next announcement about what we may or may not be allowed to do. And it puts all of us on eggshells in a way. And I always think the people that we care most about get the best and the worst of us. So that idea of be generous, be kind, and just see what's going to happen is a really useful one. Well, I think it is, which is why we chose his poem tonight.
In contrast to that, today is Colonel Tom's 100th birthday.
Yeah,
he raised more than what,
30 million. He wants to raise £1,000. He's raised 30 million.
Yeah, isn't that great? And today I read there's a guy who just rode the Atlantic for the second time, age 72. His name's Graham Walters. I'd never heard of him before, but there's a nice picture of him somewhere on the line if you want to look at him up, but we won't show you his picture. But but at the same time, I read today that there's a big spike in police reporting suicides as well. Yeah. So that's not really good to hear, but it's what happens.
It's all what's going on out there, and I'm sure you've got your own versions of how this current situation is still reaching you and your loved ones and people you care about. So we need to have a little think a bit more about the headlines that we decided to put in the book on key relationships and why it matters in Act 3. Well, key relationships by now, as we've just said, many of them will have been going on for perhaps decades, in our particular marriage here, and by no means is it all about marriage or couples tonight, absolutely not. I've known you over 3 decades now. I could perhaps know you for another 3, which is a hell of a long time, and you can't kind of invent that overnight. Same with deep friendships, colleagues, siblings, parents still left, children you're raising maybe. And so there's a cumulative aspect to all of that. And that can have good things and not so good things with it, of course, as well. We can, though, make new relationships in Act 3 that can be incredibly meaningful. There's a woman we quote in the book who realised that her husband had been killed a few years earlier, and she realised that all her most important friends are people he would never have met. So that was something that was
she'd been able to make new ones. Yes,
yeah.
She started again, which was a big surprise to her. Yeah, she was delighted by that.
And also, we keep losing people.
Yeah,
people who leave us too soon. So we begin to really question what it takes to keep a relationship in good shape at this stage in our lives and going forwards too.
So really, one of the big themes of our book and this conversation tonight is about acting before it's too late. And I suppose it's about what conversations do we need to have or do we want to have with people. Maybe they might be parents, kids, siblings, close friends, whatever. And, giving yourself time to have, who really would I, in an ideal world, like to contact, give them a call.
We also notice that there's a problem at this stage as well that can be all about resentment. In Winnie the Pooh, it says, you can't go and wait in your corner of the forest and hope that somebody comes towards you. You've got to move out towards them. And we've worked with people, we know people who get really pissed off with that, frankly, and think, why is it me that has to make all the effort? Yeah. Particularly if you're on your own. Perhaps couples get invited to places or groups of friends, but if you're on your own, it's really painful. That when you fester on that resentment, it will grow and enlarge.
And that kind of segues into Patricia's point of a week or 2 ago about forgiveness, the importance of it as a value.
Yeah.
And how if we can find a way to forgive and move on, then that gives a whole new life to a relationship potentially, doesn't it? Mm. Yeah.
So we're also aware that not everybody's a parent, but for those who are, the Act 3 parenting years are full of joy, delight and worry and maybe expense, all kinds of things, as they kind of are since the first day you held your baby. But at this stage, you've got independent adults in theory, but you may have boomerang children who have come home, particularly right now with COVID-19 going on. And that whole empty nest thing, personally, I felt it very much, and it all happened very suddenly, and then the dog died as well. So big things, and we have no parents left either. So I think empty nest syndrome is there for a reason, and yet at the same time, watching your children somehow make their way in this world is what you've been hoping for 20 years, maybe more, and it's a great thing to be able to watch that too.
Another thing which we could talk about tonight, but we won't have time for, is the phenomenon of gatekeepers. That's like people who stop us actually having a conversation that we might otherwise have. We spoke to a guy called John whose father remarried, and the stepmother basically got in the way of him and his father in his last number of years. And that was a real problem for John, this guy we spoke to, until she died. And he had a really good year with his father to re-establish that communication with him. And he described it as a good death. So he was able to say the things he wanted to say to his father. So that was really, really good news.
Okay, and then also we looked at some coaching tools that help you, and just a couple of ones quickly for tonight. So problem ownership. One thing you can think about is, hang on a sec, whose problem is this in the relationship that's troubling you? And the quick clue to that is who got upset first. And the chances are that's where the problem is sitting. So, and then you can ask for help of the other person to help you say what it is that's on your mind. If they're the one that's upset, then they may well come to you, and your job is then to just listen quietly and see what might be useful to them in terms of listening, and we'll talk about listening in a minute. And if you're both upset, it's a case of, we have an issue here and we need to find the right moment to sort this out, because if we don't do something, we'll just get more of what we're getting, which is taking us back to resentment and irritation and assumptions and those things that we know don't serve us at all, really. We also find that people can do an audit of their key relationships as well. I'll just show you this. And so you put your name in the middle, and then in the middle, first circle there is who is there for you. You know, we would say somebody that you can be vulnerable with and your most truest self. So it might not be as true as you would like it, but who are the 1, 2, maybe 3 or 4 people that might be in there with you where you could talk to them? It might be defined by somebody who you could ring in the middle of the night, but maybe not. And then the next circle out is, again, that you would perhaps think of them as good relationships, but they're not in that inner circle. And then the one beyond that is the more distant relationships. And this is a take care exercise, but it is a really useful one. We've seen it work really well for people, both negatively, where someone realized that their actual spouse was not in that circle with them. But also at the same time, we've seen this work for people where they've realized actually there are more people there than I imagined or first thought. So actually, just a little one.
You don't really need that many people in the center. You know, when you're looking for enough, one is good. And the other thing, which was definitely inspired by Malcolm and Merrill, who Malcolm will hear from in a minute, is this idea of doing a relationship audit, an MOT. We've talked about servicing your boiler in your car, making time. We do it once a year to talk to each other, go away and talk about our relationship and our life together. And that's been an incredibly useful thing to be doing. And then all of this is kind of held in this whole idea of listening, to listen to each other without criticism, without putting in my point of view, making a point, just to actually listen and actually take seriously and appreciate what someone is feeling. Whether or not you agree with it is irrelevant, is a wonderful thing to do. And it's not that easy, but it certainly gets easier as you practice it. So it's worth doing that.
And looking after yourself before you go into listening mode. So if you're already cross, angry, tired, hungover, anything, then you're not going to be in a good place to actually just listen with kindness, not listening with intent to just jump in with your own comments, thoughts and opinions. In fact, did we have a picture of the best listener in the family?
Oh, yeah. Well, Tilly, is the
Is
Ollie dog picture there available to us in the background there? Where is it? There's the
it's
tree.
the tree.
There's the roots.
There's
there
Ollie.
he is.
Yeah, best listener.
Our previous dog. The good thing about a dog is it doesn't criticize or butt in. Might stick its nose in your crutch, but it doesn't interrupt too badly. That's probably enough of that, really.
Yeah,
isn't it?
dear old Ollie.
We forgot to show the Lunig slide as well.
Oh, well, these things happen. Yeah,
we'll come back to that.
We haven't really talked much about how much we forget as we get older.
Oh my goodness, yes, huge.
We've forgotten to talk about how much we forget. There you go. But I think just to end on, all of these other things that compromise key relationships, and there are many more, and things that we could include if we were to rewrite the book. But loneliness is a big one. Esther Ranson, who lots of you will remember, founded Childline 30 years ago, I think. And then about 7 or 8 years ago, she decided there was a massive need for older people to have a helpline for them. And she founded the Silver Line. And over half the people who contact them, it's roughly 10,000 calls a year, I think, say they literally have no one else to talk to. So we're very aware in lockdown as well how many people are out there on their own and really feeling that sense of loneliness. And there is help and there is support, but you kind of have to be in the right frame of mind to want to look for it. So I know lots of you are doing great things and ringing people regularly and checking in on neighbours and that kind of thing, and it really, really does help. So out of all of these things, why are we picking on what matters before it's too late? Well, I think it kind of says it anyway, doesn't it? Like, let's pick the one thing, because it could be too late at any point for any of us. So we decided that we'd have a couple of guests to help us out with this. And the first one is our dear friend who we've known for about 25 decades, which is Malcolm Doney. Who's a freelance writer and based out in Suffolk. Hello, Malcolm. You still there?
Yes, I am.
Oh,
there he is.
There he is. Hi, Malcolm. I think lots of people will know who you are. Now, Malcolm, we always want to talk to you because you've always got an interesting gem or two on anything, and particularly Act 3. But tell us a little bit about what you also do as part of your day job, because you have experience of people saying goodbye to loved ones at the end of their life. So what's that about, and what are the pitfalls to watch out for?
Yeah, well, as well as being a freelance writer, I'm also a volunteer priest in the Church of England. So that puts me in touch with people who are, at the end of their life, as well as people who are at the beginning of their life. But this whole thing that when you get thrown together with people who are bereaved, you come across all sorts of interesting stories. And it's a privilege to be among these people and to talk through this thing and try and help them to say goodbye to someone. But it's difficult to help them sometimes if they haven't talked about this before. And that's one of the things that I think is really very important for families or friends to try and see, without getting morbid about it or without it going into some kind of spiral, is to talk about how things end. So a case in point recently, as a woman who contacted me, who I didn't know very well, but she'd come across some things I'd written. She'd come across me in the church because of she sang in a choir, and she'd really got very much alienated from the church, as had her husband, and felt really disconnected with it. And her husband had been ill for quite some time, and so they hadn't really had the discussion about what to do when he died, what he wanted, what she wanted. So I was really glad that she came to me. She came to me because she thought I was sort of agnostic enough not to be too religious about all this stuff, but to be able to help them through this pathway. But at one point she was saying, well, he'd got so disconnected with the church, well, maybe we don't have a funeral at all.
Wow.
I just hand him over to the funeral director, and you say you go and take him to the creme, and that's it. And so we had a very interesting discussion about this, and I felt that she might regret that she might feel later on that she hadn't been able properly to say goodbye. And so we talked through the things that he was interested in and what he did think about and what she felt comfortable with. And we ended up actually with a very small service with just 3 of us, but with some readings and some music. And she felt in the end that she had said goodbye to a husband who she loved very much. But she was feeling very much adrift, I think, because she hadn't had that conversation.
Do you think that there was no one else to have that kind of conversation with in her world?
Well, I think the 2 of them, because of, I can't go into the history of it, they'd very much cut off from other people, and there weren't confidants. There wasn't somebody in the middle circle who they could really discuss this with. They only had one another.
Yeah.
And so, and because he was on medication and slowly subsiding, she felt alone. So, and that's one of the things that priests can sometimes do, is you can, by virtue of being a stranger, really, coming in and be the confidant.
And what do you reckon if someone doesn't want to go to a priest?
Well, I don't have a problem with that. I think that you find somebody who you'd have trust in, somebody you can talk to. And it doesn't matter whether they're a professional or not. It's just somebody you could say, I don't know where to go with this. What do you think?
Definitely, yeah.
Because I think it is very important to share these things, because you need somebody to bounce off. I think if she hadn't had me to bounce off, then she might have said, well, I'll just hand it over to the funeral directors, and then it would have not been very satisfactory.
Do you reckon it's like one of those things that we mentioned a couple of weeks ago, which is that you don't necessarily know what you think until you've said it?
Well, I mean, that's me in a nutshell. I often say I don't know what I think until I say it or write it.
Yeah.
I need other people to bounce it off, or I need to put it in some shape or form. Then I can examine whether I believe in it or not. I think not everybody's like that. Some people can go on a long journey and work out a problem entirely by themselves, but quite a lot of us do need a foil or a sounding board.
So something in what you're saying there is that the 2 of them hadn't really had much of a chat before it got too late. So what do you think is important, Malcolm, in preparing for these kinds of things before it is too late? You know, the future in key relationships, really.
Well, I think when you read that lovely John O'Donoghue thing about taking it slow, I think that's really very important. And I don't think you can do it all at once. I think calling up the stairs to your partner and saying, I think it's about time we talked about our funerals, is going to work. You were talking about our MOTs that we do as a family. We call them Donny Days, which we've done for some decades now. Is that you can't load everything on one afternoon or one day or one time and try and sort out your entire future or analyze everything that's right or wrong. But if you keep doing it, if you keep coming in, then you can, over the years, you build up a rapport, or you build up information or instincts about one another that I think are important, and that helps you carry on. I think one other thing is, when you meet together like this, I think it's important not to have an agenda. you might have an objective about where you want to go with something, but to have an agenda and say, right, in this meeting we're going to sort all, all these things, these 5 points. I think that puts a pressure on the thing that's unhelpful.
Mm.
So I'm not quite clear. What's the difference between an objective in that context? So what might an objective be then?
Well, you might want to try and get some kind of shape about. Well, let's say you're talking about the end times. If you're talking about those things, you might say, well, let's try and get some shape about what we want. What do you feel about cremation? What do you feel about burial? How would we like to be remembered? That kind of thing. But to feel that you might end up by deciding what color the hearse is going to be, what kind of coffin you're going to have, and all those sort of things, that then focuses on the details. And
I see. Yeah.
Where are you with all of that? Your age, Malcolm.
How old are you, Malcolm?
I was 70 a few weeks ago.
So what decisions have you made, if you're prepared to let us know? Or how did you get to make some decisions?
Well, it's been quite interesting. I mean, the whole coronavirus thing has sharpened this up a bit. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think particularly because our children have said, for example, they forbade us to come to London when we were thinking, let's go in and meet up with them. And he said, no, don't you dare. We quite like you and we'd like you to stay alive. So that then makes you think, when you suddenly realize that you could be whisked off and on a ventilator and not able to say anything, it's prompted us to think about that. And we did have an earlier conversation with our kids. It was at Christmas. We were driving down to the beach to go for a walk, and we passed a signpost to a woodland burial site. And we thought, oh, that's interesting. And just because we were driving and that came up, that prompted up a whole discussion about. They were saying, well, Dad, what do you want to do? Do you want to be buried? Would you like to scatter the ashes somewhere? And also that prompted other things like, where would we find your wills? How do we sort out your bank account? We wouldn't even know how to get into your laptop. And so you start beginning to circulate around that. So in fact, this last week, we wrote an email to our kids saying, this is where the keys to the house are. I'm not telling you, by the way. Our wills you'll find in the left-hand drawer of the filing cabinet, which is in your mum's study. That sort of stuff, which is all very basic, but important stuff for them to know.
Yeah.
And it helps when the moment comes, as someone who's been in that situation when my parents died, the more straightforward you can make those things for the bereaved, the better, when there's more than enough to deal with. And these days, of course, it's all about passwords as well. Where are they? Yeah. There is an app.
Well, there's lots of apps.
There's lots of apps that will help with that kind of thing.
Let's not get into app suggestions.
Yeah. Okay, no more apps.
Advertising. We've just gone on 1Password as a family.
Yeah. So that's an app called 1Password. Yeah.
Which means that you can find these things.
Yeah.
An element of trust in this, of course.
Yes.
Indeed.
Yes, as there is in all relationships. So thank you, Malcolm. That was
very one brief thing. I don't want to hog it, but one of the things that was interesting for me is that we had that kind of conversation with our, I call them the kids, they're 42 and 40, but was on a car journey. And one of the things we've discovered with our Donny days is that sitting across a table isn't always the best place to do this. Is that when you're doing the washing up, if you're driving somewhere, if you're on a walk where you're both facing in the same direction and you're doing something else physical, it makes those kind of conversations much more easy. There's less pressure on them than if you're sitting down and saying, let's talk about this stuff.
Yeah. It's not a business meeting.
Kind of
No.
fun for us. Yeah.
Yeah.
Good.
Thanks very much.
So, and also you happen to be talking about Merrill, but you, for anybody else on the call, you could be thinking about that with a sibling perhaps, or one of your children, or perhaps your older parent, or
Yeah.
even a close friend.
Your neighbour you're having difficulty with, or a colleague.
Colleague, yeah. It's everybody has a very tailored view of what they think of as when they think key relationships, certainly. Okay.
I'm going to say thank you, Malcolm, and we're going to turn to Liz Curran.
Malcolm, are you okay if anyone wants to ask you a question when we come to the Q&A?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
So Liz, you're a finance director. You work in social housing and care. You've done that for quite a long time. Let's talk about your background briefly, specifically in relation to your siblings. That's what interested us when we were chatting previously.
Yes, so I'm one of 4 children. I'm the third, so I was the youngest for quite a long time. We're quite spread out over 16 years. So my sister is 64, my brother's 61, I'm 56, and my younger brother is 48. So there was a big gap between us as children. And of the 4, 2 of them after university went back to the family town and set up home there, and 2 of us have stayed away. So I came to university in London and have stayed in London, and my brother has lived in various places, and he's actually overseas most of the year now. So there's a bit of difference about where people sit in the family sort of network, which I think has been significant all the way through, actually. So
and how did it play out most of the time?
How did it play? I think I felt very separate. You know, I kind of ran away at 18 really, and didn't go back very much because it didn't feel like somewhere that I could really be me. And I found a great freedom in being in London and being with like-minded people. It was great. So in a sense, I did go back for Christmas and probably once or twice a year. But generally, I've lived looking back, a lot of my Act 2, doing my own thing, and sort of, you know, I think the parents were more of a linchpin within the relationships. So we had relationships with the parents. We didn't necessarily have very active relationships all of the time with all of the siblings, because when you've got parents around, that's often how it works. Yeah. So
they're the reason for that you gather and so on. Yeah.
Yeah, and they sort of set some of the tone.
Well,
I would say those relationships were not that well nurtured, a bit fragile, my sister said to me in 2017, just before my mum died, you know, we don't really know you, which I think was quite telling.
were you surprised?
Yeah, I was a bit. Yes. Yeah. So I think we went through our adult lives in that way. And then I think when the second parent is approaching the end of Act 4 and declining, we began to communicate more, certainly the 3 that were in the UK, and we set up a little WhatsApp family group. So it was easier to get messages about how mum was and when she'd gone into hospital, rather than having repeated phone calls after long visits to the hospital. So we set that up. So that became a thing we hadn't had before, just a sort of more easy way of sharing information. And then mum died at the end of 2017. And I think other people have said this, that I felt very alone and quite desolate at one point, not for a long time, but there was a point when I thought, oh my goodness, my mum is the only one that really, really knew me and accepted me for who I am fully. You know, that thing. And I also thought, gosh, you know, how are we going to keep this? What might happen? You know, I'm the one in London, 200 miles away. I haven't got a family or a partner here. I might just drift off the end here. And it felt quite as a real impossibility. And that isn't what has happened, but I think it could have happened.
Yeah,
we've all made different we've changed a bit because we've had to take responsibility. The 4 of us were orphans now, we haven't got the parents, so we've had to take responsibility for those relationships. And I think that the conversation that's ended up in the book, I had a conversation 2 or 3 months after Mum had died, so we were still feeling our way with this new version of this new landscape, really. And I think because I'd been on your weekend, I was a little more aware of these things and felt a little emboldened to dig a little deeper in that conversation. And I was really pleasantly surprised by how open my sister was. And I would always have said, we're so different, chalk and cheese, you know, not much in common. But actually, we had a really good conversation, and we have had a number of those really good conversations. We're never going to be in each other's pockets. We're not living next door to each other as some families do. We're not. But we have got more in common than I had thought, actually. Which is,
were those conversations face to face or on the phone, or how were you actually physically doing that?
Most of them have been on the phone, but there was a period in the last year of Mum's life when I did day trips up to visit her because it wasn't that convenient to stay with anybody up there. So I did day trips. But what my sister did is she'd pick me up from the care home and then take me to the train station, but we'd have about an hour where she'd make a cup of tea and we'd have a hot cross bun. And actually those conversations, which were face to face, ended up being quite profound as well.
Yeah.
And I think it opened up to me the fact that even though we've been quite distant in our adult lives, I mean, the eldest and the youngest haven't. They've got a different experience. They've been quite close because they have been in that sort of hometown bubble, but I've not. And I think it gave me the opportunity to talk about some things. You know, there were only 4 people that grew up in that household as children.
Yeah.
So though we have a unique experience, so even though we've done lots of different things, actually, and I've been gardening a lot recently, as people will know, I think we have deep roots together.
Yeah.
And I think that's important. And so even though we're quite different, we have got things in common. And I wouldn't want some of the bits in the book to about, you know, what do you want to look back on your life? And I wouldn't want to get to the end of my life and go, well, I just let those relationships go.
Yeah.
Wasn't proactive at.
So what would you say to somebody who might be in a similar situation to you, Liz?
I would say a couple of things. One is don't let your past hold you back. You might be surprised. You might be making assumptions about the person from how it was a while ago, and it might have changed. They might.
Yeah.
See, I feel like people do change. My sister has now retired, and maybe there's less stress in her life, and maybe it's therefore easier to focus a bit on this.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing I would say, and I experienced a bit of this today because I had a conversation with one of my brothers, and it turned into a more difficult conversation than I expected, and I ended up being quite upset because anyway, it's just how things are sometimes. So I liked the John O'Donoghue thing about kind of pause and take a longer view.
Yeah.
But I think be careful with your heart, and you said it, Judy, be careful how you have some of these conversations.
Yeah.
I kind of went in thinking, brilliant, I'm doing this thing this week, I'm going to talk to both my siblings that are in the UK.
Yes.
And I was like, brilliant.
Yeah.
And one was really positive, it wasn't particularly profound, and the other was all right, but there was a bit where we tripped up a bit.
Yeah, there was some pushback from the other side.
It was just a bit of like, oh, yes, and some kind of home truth that I think had built up. I think sometimes things build up. So I think when you're beginning to set relationships going again that may have been a bit dormant or a bit neglected, I think sometimes it's like clearing the pipes. I think sometimes some stuff comes out in a bit of a rush, maybe not in a very pretty or easy manner.
Yeah.
And I have to let that go and move past it. And there was a bit of that happened around the time we were talking more around Mum's end of her life. And there's obviously still a bit more. So, and we're getting to know each other.
Yeah. At this stage.
Yes, if we know what makes each other tick, because we haven't learned that. We didn't really learn it as children because we were also spread out, and we haven't really learned it as adults, or certainly I haven't. So there might be some bumpy bits, but I think keep going. I think it is worth doing. Obviously, everybody has got to weigh that up. Some relationships so dysfunctional that it's too painful to go there. But I think hopefully for most people there's room for a bit of repair. And I think things like, I was talking to my sister yesterday and she was telling me about the grandparents, because she had more time with the grandparents. I didn't really know most of them, knew one of them when I was up to about the age of 10, but she's got another 8 years. So I said to her, I really want to have conversations about my grandmother, who I feel very connected to. So there's kind of gold and pearls in the mud.
Lovely.
Yeah. No, that's really terrific. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm struck by what you said and the link between what Malcolm said about when you're joined on an enterprise, whether it's a walk, when you were visiting or whatever, you were visiting your mother in the home with your sister. And it was out of that came good conversation. So it wasn't about going nose to nose to make it right or to have a big, deep conversation. That's not really the way to do this.
No, it just happened.
Yeah.
And it was a small chunk as well. It wasn't too long. It was, 45 minutes or so.
That's right. And people need, because there's a lot of potential anxiety on both sides, the fact that you have a train to catch actually is really useful. And, and so that, she knows that, then that perhaps actually helps the conversation in a curious kind of way. Yeah.
I think you're very honest and brave, Liz, to be sharing this with all of us this evening, and also that what I really like about the way you talk about it as well is that you make it normal and clear for all of us that these things are never 100% sorted, solved, ticked. That it might be that you've made some progress and taken some steps in a direction that has worked to a certain extent, but relationships by definition are messy and tricky and complicated, and yet there is hope and green shoots,
and they are capable of being wonderful as well.
Yeah. And there is some change there, and even as I hear us say that, I know that there will be people who feel I just still can't do that. So we asked you to take care tonight because this is not an evening on how do we sort our pension out or cruises or anything like that. We're the whole Act 3 movement that we're about is look in there and see what you want to do while you still can, because we've all seen far too many stories of people who've been eaten up with regret and resentment.
Yes, regret is the key word, isn't it? It's trying to avoid getting to a place where we regret doing something or not doing something or saying something or not saying something. So thank you very much, Liz, and thank you, Malcolm.
You're welcome.
I think we've got about 15 minutes to go, and there's lots of chat popping up. So if it's okay, Tilly, we'll go to some questions, comments. Remember, if you put a Q or a question to enable Tilly to know that you're happy to come live now. So
what have we got, Till?
Well, I just wanted to say, first of all, we've had loads of people saying thanks to Liz for being so open and honest. It's been rather moving over here. I had an anonymous question come in asking how to balance a relationship when you are the key listener for someone, but they are maybe not the number one for you. So how to manage that relationship imbalance.
It is hard. I remember a lovely lady who was widowed that I knew many, many years ago, and she said to me, "I'm number 2 and maybe number 3 to quite a few people, but I'm nobody's number 1." And I've never forgotten that. And I think it's a bit like what we were saying earlier, that ideally you would have 1 or 2 people for whom you can be as vulnerable as possible with that person, that they can be someone that you can trust as best you can, and it may not be reciprocal, and that is how it is. You may be able to
can't make someone
have a conversation about that perhaps it might be I don't always feel listened to by you or something like that, but in all honesty, sometimes the whole way in which the relationship is carried out is that it isn't two-way. And I have learned that myself over the years, that you have as well, that actually if you don't expect anything back, you might be surprised by something that comes back,
Yeah.
but it's all about where do you need to get your needs met, even if it's not in that relationship.
Sometimes I think it's possible, we've had this conversation, that it's possible to know someone and to think this ought to be kind of even. This is not
Or reciprocal.
Entirely reciprocal or balanced. And then I remember this happened with someone we know where they realized, I'm the listener, that person doesn't really give me what I need, but I give them what they appear to need. But once that realization had happened, there was a kind of release. There was a freeing.
But the second thing to say is that that relationships do need external help and support too. That actually we said 2 or 3 weeks ago, we're not ashamed to say it at all. We went for 6 sessions with marriage counselling all of last year because we wanted to reboot the difficult parts of our marriage as we probably will have another 20, 30 years. So we would always say, if it's really bad, please don't sit and suffer in silence, and get some help and support.
And then I think it's probably enough for the moment. Let's go to another question. Yeah, we could go on forever about that.
Okay. Just a reminder, so do type your questions in the chat box. Liz Scott, I'm going to come to you. Hi, Liz.
Hello.
Rose, Jude.
And it's beautiful.
Thank you for your fabulous Zoom session. I'm in New Zealand and I happen to be Judy's sister, so I'll try not to be too silly. Anyway, my question was how you can change your attitude is one thing, but how do you convince your significant other that they need to change theirs too, especially when it's an adult child? And this has been an ongoing thing. Judy knows all about it, but just to share this with everybody in a very general way. We're all seven of us are living in the same house at the moment with 3 generations, and it has its challenges. And we're trying to convince our adult children that, and they're pretty good most of the time, but we feel that the best way for this whole scenario to work is to have everybody with a very tolerant attitude. And if they see things on the floor like children's toys, not to just kick them aside and just to pick them up. All of those very small things have an enormous bearing on key relationships and how stable they are. And it's the little things like the squeezing the tube of toothpaste the wrong way that cause divorces, etc. And I think everybody can relate to that. With the adult child situation, they are feeling this as well on a different level. My husband Steve and I feel this on an overall umbrella major responsibility to keep the family going level, whereas the boys and in their 20s and 30s see it in a different way. So it's all about having the ability to tune in really to other people in that very tiny group, confined group at the moment, to tune into where their feelings are at. But to do that requires a huge amount of guesswork, which is exhausting.
Well, to avoid that, absolutely, Liz. So to avoid the guesswork, have you ever tried having a family meeting where you all get around together? And the other thing is everyone to say Judy's phrase in our family is what's everyone's needs and wants. So everyone's able to say what drives them mad and what they would like.
I have promoted that to Adrian, and we've had the odd family meeting, but we haven't managed to do it since COVID. And I really need to get that.
I think it's essential.
I need buy-in from everybody to do that. And I've given them we've had jobs lists and agreed on jobs and chores around the house, but that's not the guts of it. It's how we all get along and consideration for one person.
Well, I have something that sometimes helps because, as most of you know, I work with lots of parents, and that includes their adult children. And so a sort of general quick tip on family meetings is the triple C. And it's
I'll write that down. Hang on.
C, so it's C for checking in. So it's not just right, who needs to take the bins out and who's going to do cooking on. It's not just straight into jobs. It's checking in.
What does checking in mean?
Checking in means, how are we all doing? This is exceptional circumstances right now. So
we've all been in tears in this house. There's 6 adults in this house. We've all been in tears at one time or another, if not once or twice.
Absolutely normal.
I have too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So C is checking in. You start with that. You also limit how long you're going to sit around the table, so people know that they're not going to be expected to just carry on for 2.5 hours. But so C for checking in.
That's right, and just with mum bossing and being the chair all the time.
Yes,
I've given them the option of chairing the meeting each, and
yes, all of that.
Marie chaired it one day, and I'm giving the adult kids a chance to chair the meeting themselves.
Yes,
alternately.
that's it, yes. And then the second C is for...
It's the C's that are tricky, yeah.
So checking in, she never stops talking. Key relationships with sisters. The second C is for get creative with what are the needs and what are the wants, and not just be going round and round in circles. So lots of people are actually really good at problem solving. As a human race, we are really good at getting ourselves out of difficulty. So get creative, that's the second C. And the third C is for what are you actually going to commit to? So once all the ideas are out, which are the ones that are going to land? And you probably will have to write them down. But the other thing is review. I mean, in our house here, we have a short meeting most Sunday nights to just talk about what's coming up for the week. Everybody's got different diary things going on, and what are we going to need? So, and just commit to keep talking. And if there's anything going in the right direction, that's when we can use our voices to say, thank you for showing up. This is really helping me. Okay, let's go to one more question.
Cool. So Rebecca Leem. Can you hear us, Rebecca?
Hi, Rebecca.
Hi.
Hi, sat here in my pyjamas, feeling so at home with you guys. I feel like I've got to know you.
Yes, and we've never met. I'm not wearing my pyjamas yet.
Pajama party.
What's the question? Hi.
How do you deal with a difficult family member where you see all the things you don't like about them, about yourself in them, and they feel the same about you, but they don't want to work at it, and you've not seen each other for years?
Whoa.
Wow. Okay. I'm sorry.
That's quite hard. Yeah.
That sounds pretty tough, Rebecca. So I suppose one of my questions would be, I'm wondering what you've tried so far, because, you know, it wouldn't be fair on you if we sort of suggested things and you said, I've done that. But I think given the nature of 5 minutes to go, and that's a big thing, my first reaction is maybe to ask Liz Curran, actually, because that was sort of your story in a way, wasn't it? Would you feel like that, Liz, or no? Yes? Or she's pulling a face.
I don't know, really. I think keep talking, but it's really difficult because people have different skills and different experiences of managing relationships.
And I think, Liz, to bail you out, my feeling, I quite agree with you.
Yeah.
Different people have different experiences. They come from different places, and you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink, Rebecca. And I think if the other family member doesn't want to engage in some way or other, I mean, so we talked tonight about engaging in the gentlest of ways, coming alongside, as Malcolm said, and as Liz said, about not making it like that, but trying to find an excuse or some pretext to come alongside in the gentlest of ways. Now, of course, I'm guessing there's family history, there's strong feelings on both sides. I don't know, but you're nodding slightly, Rebecca. So that makes it harder, doesn't it? You know, if you didn't know the person, it's much easier to have that kind of coming alongside thing. So there's quite a lot at stake. So I would aim low and don't try and change very much.
The other thing is, Rebecca, is that writing it all down is really helpful as well. If you've done that, I don't know, but you might want to write the letter that you would really like to write. And that doesn't mean you send the letter, but you get it out of your head and out of your heart and onto a piece of paper. Maybe even as if it's an exercise for yourself of, if you only knew you had a few more days left, what would you really love to be able to say to that family member? And to write it down. And that in itself can help you to sort of see what are the bits that you really, really want to try and resolve, and what are the bits you can let go of, because perhaps they're to do with old habits or old resentments that could be let go of. But it's something that you probably need some good help and support to be able to manage that. Because, if it's been going on a long time, and also what you said about what you see in them you don't like about yourself. You know, that's big
Yeah,
stuff.
it
And
is.
I'd really encourage you to get some support to manage that if you feel now's the time to start to really see if you can move that relationship to a better place. Is that okay for now, Rebecca?
Thank you.
Yeah, write it out if that helps.
Writing down is a great
Yeah.
way to,
Yeah.
you know, a big mind dump is a great idea.
Yeah.
Malcolm, you raised your hand. Did you want to add anything to that?
Yes, it was something that Rebecca said, and also something that I observed in what Liz was saying, is that often when families together, you fall into those old cycles, and you have the same old arguments you always used to. You know, when you were kids, you know, one's the bossy one, one's the competitive one, one's the clown, and sometimes those things reinforce themselves, and it's worth being aware of that. I mean, I think it was very, you know, grown up of you, Rebecca, to realise that, you know, these things cut both ways. But I would reinforce what Adrian said, was to set the bar low, and in fact, and try to meet with people without the agenda, or almost without the objective, and just say, let's have a drink together.
Yeah.
We're not going to solve anything, but just let's have a drink together.
Yeah.
You know, and talk about stuff, and see what emerges, then maybe what emerges.
Yeah.
And it can change. I think as well, somewhere try and see if there's any hope for you. That, you know, there's an old saying, isn't there, that you can't change other people, but you can change yourself. And if you change, then people respond to how you are.
They respond to the change in you, yeah. Which is a kind of weird and wonderful thing. Yeah.
Any other comments, Till?
Well, you're out of time,
I
actually.
think we're out of time. Yeah, it's 9:15.
Well, I think in the end, you know, for us, so much of this comes down to love, and what does love actually mean? And we close the chapter with a reading from 1 Corinthians 13 in the Bible, because for us it was still the kind of best definition there was. It's still read at more weddings than anything else. So we'll just read you this before you go, because it's a good old thought or two. So love is patient and kind. Love does not envy or boast. It is not arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice at wrongdoing, but rejoices with the truth. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never ends.
But this webinar does end, and we're just thinking, what one thing, one action might you take away from tonight? That's something just to think about. We mentioned, please subscribe to the mailing list if you want to be hearing from us, and you'll be welcome to email us, either of us or both of us, if you wish. Next week, we've got the luxury of having Richard Vincent, the Emeritus Professor of Brighton and Sussex Medical School, to talk about health in Act 3. That won't go on as long as this one. I'm sure, I'm only kidding, it's going to be huge. So he's great, and you'll like him very much. So we're looking forward to that. We're going to say a big thank you to Malcolm
and to Liz. So clapping, everybody, clapping to Malcolm and Liz, and to all of you for your honesty, your comments, your questions. Keep them coming in, and let us know what else you might want. Going past health, actually, we're beginning to think, what do we do when we get to the other side of health? What would that look like? So send in your ideas.
We're wondering about getting people to be coached live, but we won't go into that now.
Yeah. Okay. Well, meanwhile, stay well, save the NHS, look after your loved ones. And as we said at the start, be kind to yourselves. This has been a big night, and sending lots and lots of love from dark and wet Cambridge. And we'll see you next week for health.
Thank you. Bye.